Good day. On February 23, Monday, the International Criminal Court begins its pre-trial hearing on the case of former President Rodrigo Duterte. Duterte is being accused of crimes against humanity. This is in connection with his war on drugs during his presidency. We'll try to answer some of the questions raised regarding the case of the former president. With me is Attorney Chris Gargantiel. He is known to be a top caliber litigator and professor of criminal law. So Attorney Chris knows his way around the court, especially during trials. This time, he will be explaining the legal process surrounding the possible trial of Duterte. Good day, Attorney Chris.
Good day, Mike. Thank you for having me here. It's nice to be back. Thank you very much.
Welcome, you're always welcome. So let's get into this. First, briefly, why does the International Criminal Court exist? What is the purpose of such a court when all the other countries around the world have its own justice system?
Yeah. The existence of the ICC, or the International Criminal Court, based in the Netherlands, is by virtue of the Rome Statute. Now, for a certain time, the Philippines became a party member to the Rome Statute, so it volunteered to be under the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court for a certain period of time. Now, the purpose of the ICC is to try or to litigate on the most serious crimes of international nature, because there's this problem internationally that there are certain war crimes or crimes against humanity that would not be addressed by the existing national process in the individual member states. Now, the ICC was organized. It exists to address the most serious crimes of the international nature. So, if the national system does not function, does not process the crimes, or if there is no genuine action on those controversies, the ICC is there to try those crimes.
Thank you. In relation to this, do you see any difference between the legal process of the ICC and our own justice system?
But yeah, there are basic differences, although both are criminal in nature. One is international criminal law, and the other one is in our country is subject generally to the revised penal code and other special statutes. There are general differences. One is the scope of the ICC proceedings. It's narrower because it's only limited to international crimes. Unlike in the Philippines, we have hundreds of penal statutes. The revised penal code is only but one of those. So, insofar as scope is concerned, the ICC's subject matter is limited. Now, also victim participation. So in Philippine setting, victims can directly file their cases with the Office of the Prosecutor and have criminal actions instituted, but not quite in the case of cases before the ICC. The victims would have to communicate with the Office of the Prosecutor, and the Office of the Prosecutor would be taking it from there. So the victim cannot directly appear or participate before the International Criminal Court. Another is the evidence required. So in the Philippines, it's similar to ICC. We have that requirement of proof beyond reasonable doubt before someone gets convicted. It's the same with the ICC. However, the evidence that they require, apart from testimonial, documentary evidence, they also would require establishing the pattern violating the crimes under its jurisdiction. So with regard to that, the evidence approach is quite different. Another is the complexity or the admissibility of the evidence. So the ICC always assess whether proceedings exist and are genuine at the national level of the member state before they intervene or before they take cognizance. So those are basically the difference I noticed. And another is that we will see later on our concept here in the Philippines of double jeopardy. So once you get indicted and you are acquitted, or if the case is dismissed against you without your consent, they can't prosecute you for the same alleged crime again. that concept of double jeopardy, I'm not quite sure if that exists in the ICC. So those are the basic differences I noticed.
That is really interesting. Allow me to ask you to be more specific for the purpose or for the benefit of our viewers.
Yes.
What specific crimes are under the jurisdiction of the ICC?
So we mentioned earlier that the scope of the ICC's jurisdiction or over the kinds of crimes it can act upon are limited as compared to ours. So basically, there are 4 crimes under the Rome Statute that the ICC can take cognizance of. First is genocide, second is crimes against humanity. We have third would be war crimes, and fourth was crime of aggression. Let's discuss briefly each of those crimes I mentioned earlier. When we speak of genocide, it contemplates an intention to destroy or to persecute or to harm members of a particular nationality, ethnicity, race, or religion. So that's a genocide. Crimes against humanity, while it's similar to performing harmful acts on people, on persons, the target there is not nationality-based or ethnicity or religion. In crimes against humanity, it's a harm to the civilian population. So that's considered as crime against humanity. So it would predicate crimes under crimes against humanity would be murder, rape, physical injury, and so on and so forth. War crimes, meanwhile, these are crimes committed by, well, when during war, and they are actually examples of which would be a violation of the Geneva Convention. So if there would be a torturing victims or prisoners of war, that would be war crimes. Using children to act as soldiers during war, that's also a war crime. And fourth is crimes of aggression. With regard to crimes of aggression, this involves one sovereign state using force, violating the sovereignty, the territoriality of another sovereign state. So we have one country waging war against another using force. That's crimes of aggression. It's also the fourth or the last crime that the International Criminal Court can take cognizance of.
So there are 4 crimes
Yes.
under the jurisdiction of the ICC. As you had mentioned, genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crimes of aggression. Duterte's case falls under crimes against humanity. Would you mind explaining why the war on drugs falls under this category?
Yes. Well, first let's clarify that the indictment of former President Duterte for committing crimes against humanity is based on the allegation of the Office of the Prosecutor before the International Criminal Court that during his time as president, and also including those times that he was mayor of Davao City, he committed a widespread or systematic attack directed against the civilian population. This is, to put proper context to it, this is when he waged the so-called war against drugs. So during his time as a mayor of Davao City, allegedly he acted as a indirect perpetrator by inducing the so-called Davao Death Squad to eliminate or to neutralize alleged drug dealers or drug users. Now, that kind of criminal action attributed to former President Duterte continued when he assumed the presidency in 2016. But you have to understand that you will remember sometime in 2019, the Philippines decided to withdraw from the Rome Statute, meaning to say it no longer wanted to participate or submit itself to the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court sometime in 2019. So the problem with that is notwithstanding the fact that the Philippines withdrew its participation in the Rome Statute in 2019, ICC, however, maintained that it still has jurisdiction on alleged criminal acts during the time that the Philippines was a member. So those criminal acts covered by the jurisdiction of the ICC range from November 2011, when he was allegedly still a mayor of Davao City, stretching up to a day before 2019 or March 16, 2019, when the Philippines was still a member of the ICC or the Rome Statute. Now, let's go back to your earlier question, Mike. So it's crimes against humanity because it's not a genocide, it's not a war crime, and it's not actually an aggression, a crime of aggression, but it's a widespread systematic attack. His alleged um, uh, war against drugs was perceived to be a systematic attack against a civilian populace. Hence, it's a crime against humanity.
That's really intriguing. As you said earlier, under the Philippine legal system, when a complaint is filed, and we see the complaint here being a crime against humanity, the complaint under the legal, and please correct me if I'm wrong, under the Philippine legal system, would be filed by either the complainant, the
Yes.
person aggrieved by the aggressor, or filed by the state in cases where it goes beyond the damage goes beyond just the specific individual who was victimized in this case. So under the legal process of the ICC, who can file the complaint,
Yes, yes.
and can this actually be abused?
Yeah. So the first question regarding who can file it, strictly speaking, individuals, persons like you and I, we don't usually file cases the way we file criminal cases here in the Philippines. Individuals, non-governmental organizations, and other groups, what they can do is to communicate or to send an information, or we can treat it as a complaint directly to the Office of the Prosecutor. The Office of the Prosecutor, similar to the Philippines, it's the first line in that criminal proceeding where complaints for crimes allegedly committed by a defendant or an accused is threshed out. So individuals, we can't go straight to the International Criminal Court. We have to first send an information or a complaint or a communication to the Office of the Prosecutor for it to perform preliminary examination. Now, going to your question, if it can be abused, well, there is always that human element in all proceedings, in any legal system for that matter. And having said that, it's not 100% free from any mistakes or human element. So there may be an element of abuse that's possible, but we have safeguards. The Office of the Prosecutor performs safeguard to at least minimize, if not prevent absolutely, the abuse of those filing or sending of information. So what the Office of the Prosecutor would be doing in case a communication or an information is sent to it is to screen, to assess, to screen. And usually we call that preliminary examination. That's the way they prevent or at least minimize abuses.
With these clear processes within the ICC, you've clearly explained that there are safeguards
Yes.
against a possible hole in the system. But within the ICC, who will actually investigate the complaint?
Yeah. So once the communication or the information is filed with the Office of the Prosecutor, it's the latter, the OTP, the Office of the Prosecutor, that investigates. That portion, that stage of the proceedings, we call that as a preliminary examination. So during the investigation, the Office of the Prosecutor, they gather witnesses, testimony, documents, videos, forensic materials, and other evidence. Now, that we can't consider yet the criminal case before the ICC as instituted at that point. It's merely a mode of screening or investigating if there is sufficient evidence to warrant the prosecution of a certain defendant or accused. So that's their, it's the OTP, Office of the Prosecutor, that investigates.
Very clear. Now, regarding the credibility of the evidence, does the ICC employ the same standard as our justice system?
Yeah. So we have to understand the proceedings before the International Criminal Court is criminal in nature. Similar to us when we have criminal proceedings. The consequence of conviction would either be the forfeiture of some states, they forfeit life, some forfeit up to liberty or life imprisonment, or forfeiture of property, life, liberty, or property. So these are criminal effects, or rather conviction for criminal offenses. And having that kind of consequence in case of conviction requires a high degree or a high a high level of proof. And in our jurisdiction in the Philippines, it's proof beyond reasonable doubt. In the case of ICC, it's also the same quantity, proof beyond reasonable doubt. If I can explain further, this is a quantum of evidence, the highest quantum of evidence, because it calls for the forfeiture of either life, liberty, or property in certain cases. As compared to in civil cases, it's preponderance of evidence. In case of administrative proceedings, it's substantial evidence. So the highest quantity, the highest degree of evidence required, proof beyond reasonable doubt, is required in both instances. Now, proof should not be confused with evidence. So for example, the proof required is proof beyond reasonable doubt. The evidence, however, to attain that proof or to give that proof would be documentary evidence, testimonial evidence, witness recollection. We have that. But as I mentioned earlier, there's one difference insofar as evidence are concerned that between ICC and in the Philippines. While we both utilize documentary evidence, testimonial evidence, or even object evidence, in ICC, they also rely on pattern, evidence of a certain pattern. Because I mentioned earlier, the crimes that the ICC is dealing involves multiple victims. So genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes. It cannot be arriving at the conclusion that these were committed cannot be based on an isolated incident. So there must be a multiplicity of victims, complainants, and they must establish a pattern that all of those victims, all of those individual crimes committed is towards the commission of that particular crime subject to the ICC's jurisdiction. Hence, the need to establish a pattern. In our case, it's individuals being tried or filing cases against another individual in our criminal system. That kind of pattern is not necessary. But again, to reiterate, both jurisdictions, ICC, Philippine courts, in criminal cases, both of them, they require proof beyond reasonable doubt before someone gets convicted.
So at least it's assuring that it's not going to be based on one thing or another, but a combination of different things.
Yes.
Because so far what we've seen with regard to the initial coverage of the arrest and things building up to February 23 has been a bit of a focus on the alleged witnesses or less testimonies of specific individuals.
Yes. You will see the degree of standard required in ICC cases. It's really it's intricate. You will notice that records will show that the Office of the Prosecutor, as early as 2018, started already its preliminary examination, and it's already 2026. This is only just the last proceeding involving pre-trial stage. So from 2016, 2018, that's 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. So more than 5 years just to reach pre-trial. So it's very intricate. It's really very, very delicate. And we have to expect the evidence involved. It's really voluminous. It's really voluminous. All just to come up with proof beyond reasonable doubt. Now, the next question there would involve, of course, credibility of the evidence. So there would be a lot of complainants involved. They're trying to show a pattern. So how do we know that the evidence presented is credible? How do we know that it's sufficient to prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt? That's the challenge. That's the challenge because it's very difficult to listen to all testimonial evidence. It's very difficult to scrutinize all documentary object evidence. So there has to be a mechanism that would filter, that would tell us, that would tell the ICC, that would tell the world, is it really worth going through trial? And this is where the confirmation of charges come in. So during the confirmation of the charges, it's actually a way of gatekeeping or determining whether the prosecution's evidence is strong enough to confirm that the specific charges the specific charges are sufficient and the case can be referred to trial. Think of it like a structured screening. Prosecutor must show more than suspicion. There must be enough that he must produce, he must convince the pre-trial chamber that there is enough for this case to go into full trial. So the confirmation of charges that we are about to experience now, that's the purpose. They will determine in the next few days if the evidence is sufficient to warrant this case being referred to a full-blown trial.
So during this pre-trial portion of this hearing, we see the confirmation of charges. But aside from that, what else can we expect to see, or what else happens during the actual pre-trial stage?
So in the pre-trial stage, so it says before trial, before pre-trial. So apart from checking whether there is sufficient legal basis to have former President Duterte undergo a full-blown trial, they would also they would also assess the previous challenges to its jurisdiction, because you remember there are also arguments being raised that the ICC does not have jurisdiction already over the alleged crimes committed by former President Duterte. So there's jurisdiction. Another that has to be considered in the pre-trial stage would be the admissibility of the evidence. So you see, admissibility has to be considered because we have to draw the line between evidence based on personal knowledge or testimonies based on personal knowledge and those that are not. Example of which would be evidence based on newspaper or media reports. This would be difficult to admit in evidence because they are not really, there's no way of authenticating them. We can't, it's tantamount to hearsay evidence already. So those questions on admissibility have to be thrashed out. Also, the matter on witness protection, we have to understand there is a great number of witnesses here. Victims, their family members, they will be testify about their alleged experiences, what they witnessed. So they have to be protected from harassment or from any retaliatory moves. No? So this would also have to be thrashed out during the pre-trial, witness protection. So confirmation of the charges, questions on jurisdiction, admissibility of the evidence, and witness protection, this would have to be hurdled during the pre-trial stage.
So at that point, the judges usually decide within 60 days if there is enough evidence for the case to go to trial. In our justice system, what kind of evidence is needed to convince judges that a case must go into trial?
In the Philippines, before criminal cases are submitted to the court, the investigating prosecutor must determine the existence of probable cause. That's indicated in the Constitution. You will remember in the 1987 Constitution, no warrant of arrest shall be issued unless there is probable cause after the judge is convinced that it is existing probable cause. Now, the mode of determining the existence of probable cause is via preliminary investigation being conducted by the prosecutor. Probable cause, as compared to proof beyond reasonable doubt, is a lower quantum of evidence. So the name speaks for itself, probable cause. It's not certain, it's not beyond reasonable doubt, it's simply probable. That's enough for the warrant of arrest to be issued by the judge. Unlike in this case, in the ICC, it's we call it confirmation of charges. The pre-trial chamber will have to be convinced that there is sufficient evidence that will be the basis or that the sufficient evidence that is substantial that would warrant the case proceeding into full-blown trial. So in the Philippines, probable cause is lesser as compared to the evidence required in the confirmation of charges.
As you had clearly pointed out earlier, under most justice systems, the prosecution must prove beyond reasonable doubt the guilt of the accused. But what kind of evidence can prove that the accused is guilty beyond reasonable doubt?
Yes. So, proof beyond reasonable doubt is the kind of proof. How you deliver proof beyond reasonable doubt will depend on the kind of individual evidence presented to the tribunal or to the court. So this evidence would be testimonial evidence or evidence from credible witnesses, insiders, survivors, investigators. Then we also have documentary evidence consisting of official records, reports, logs, orders, communication. Then we have object or forensic evidence. This would be the autopsies, ballistics, analysis or findings, and even the scene of the evidence. And the one that I mentioned earlier, something that is required before the ICC, which is not required in our criminal proceeding, is the pattern evidence, which is the multiple incidents showing a consistent method or policy relevant for crimes against humanity allegations. So all of these, it's rarely one evidence, one magic document that would be considered already as proof beyond reasonable doubt. For us to arrive at proof beyond reasonable doubt, the totality of the evidence must be considered. Object, documents, testimony, even the pattern.
Yeah, the pattern of evidence is really interesting in terms of its aspect being integrated into the investigation during the trial itself. Let's look closer at the case against Duterte. First of all, why is he being tried by the ICC? Why not a criminal court? Is it assumed that the ICC steps in when one country does not have a working justice system? This is true, of course, in several countries where there is an ongoing civil war or violent revolution.
The reason there is, the key word is complementarity. The ICC is not limited to failed states or civil wars. There must be complementarity, meaning the ICC may proceed when national processes are not genuinely investigating or prosecuting the same conduct in persons most responsible, or otherwise they are unable. In the Philippines, the major dispute has long been whether our local mechanisms here are sufficient and genuine to address the supposed crimes being tried before the ICC. That's why ICC litigation often it focuses on admissibility, complementarity, not just whether crimes happen, but whether ICC should be the forum. Now, the question on whether ICC can appropriately take cognizance of the matters being imputed against former President Duterte is pending actually before the Supreme Court. So the petitions were filed before the Supreme Court. They are petitions for habeas corpus, requiring the explanation why President Duterte had to be transferred to the Netherlands to face trial before a foreign court. Now, ICC maintains it has jurisdiction over the alleged crimes committed by the Philippines because at the time that these were committed, the alleged crimes, the Philippines was still a state party. So it commonly stated it's from November 1, 2011 up to March 16, 2019 before the Philippines withdrew in March 2019. Now, it's still pending before the Supreme Court, but I have to emphasize that while the matter on the ICC jurisdiction is still pending, in 2021, the Supreme Court already ruled that the Supreme Court dismissed a petition questioning the withdrawal of the Philippines from the Rome Statute, saying that in 2021, it's already moot and academic. The Philippines has already withdrawn as early as 2019, so it dismissed the petition. So let's wait and see what the Supreme Court say with regard to the jurisdiction of the ICC now.
Now, with this next question, you've already touched on this a little bit earlier at the start of our conversation. But with regard to evidence, are reports from media considered evidence in such a case?
Media reports, they can be useful leads. That may be during the preliminary examination, the earliest stage. during the preliminary examination by the Office of the Prosecutor, they can be useful leads and they can support context, but they are not automatically proof beyond reasonable doubt. In our courts, whether here in the Philippines or even in the ICC, media content are often susceptible to issues involving hearsay on whether the person testifying has personal knowledge or whether the reporter relaying the information has personal knowledge. Another matter that we have to hurdle is authentication. So is the video real? Is it unedited? Is it properly sourced? Because technology now, it's so wild. You know, even artificial intelligence is capable of altering, making it appear true. And another thing that we have to consider in media evidence is fairness. Can the other side test? Can it pass scrutiny through cross-examination? So media may be able to help investigators to lead them to what witnesses or to which witnesses or documents they can consider. But the strongest evidence is usually direct testimony, authenticated records, and verifiable forensic materials. These are the evidence I mentioned earlier to arrive at proof beyond reasonable doubt. Testimonial, documentary, object, and even pattern evidence.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be taken lock, stock, and barrel, that
Yes,
on face
yes.
value. It must be verified, must be
Yes.
authenticated.
Yes. So at first, if for purposes of preliminary examination, I suppose that was the basis of the Office of the Prosecutor when they were initially investigating this way back in 2018. But as we move further during these proceedings, we have to rely on those four key evidence if they are to arrive at proof beyond reasonable doubt. If they have to arrive there.
Okay. Now, regarding the charges against Duterte, what are, again, the alleged crimes he committed when he was president and Davao City Mayor?
So we mentioned earlier, out of the four crimes cognizable by the International Criminal Court, it's crimes against humanity that is being imputed against former President Duterte. Based on publicly reported cases, case descriptions, the Office of the Prosecutor alleged crimes against humanity because, according to the OTP, murder was committed by the cohorts of former President Duterte. Let me clarify. It's not the allegation of the Office of the Prosecutor against former President Duterte is not, he was not the one. Their allegation does not involve him being the one directly committing the murder. They are alleging that it's President Duterte who is a perpetrator. In criminal law here in the Philippines, it's equivalent to a principal by inducement, not a principal by direct participation. So for example, if we have someone who pulls the trigger, killing someone, that's the principal by direct participation. If there is someone who induced that person to pull the trigger, it's a principal by inducement. In the ICC stage, what is being imputed against former President Duterte is not being a principal by direct participation, but being a principal by inducement. And the term that they use there is him being a co-perpetrator, indirect co-perpetrator for the crime against humanity of murder. Now, murder is an individual crime that can be punished here in the Philippines. It's committed here. It's committed in all jurisdictions. We have homicide, manslaughter, murder. But what makes murder a crime against humanity in the ICC context is that murder was committed as an attack to a particular, to the civilian population under the guise of allegedly war against drugs. Hence, the crime against humanity imputation or allegation against former President Duterte.
That's very clear. Now, Attorney Chris, based on previous trials before the ICC, do you believe Duterte's case, if it does go to trial, that it will be long? Will it take years?
Actually, Mike, it has already taken years from the time that the preliminary
Correct.
examination
Correct.
was commenced by the was performed by the Office of the Prosecutor. And as I mentioned earlier, it's almost 2018. How many years? 6. It's already 8 years. It's already 8 years, and we still haven't terminated the pre-trial stage. Now we have to understand the stages before the ICC. It starts with the preliminary examination by the Office of the Prosecutor. Then after that, it's followed by the investigation by the ICC. The purpose of which is to determine if they have to issue a warrant or not. And then if the respondent or the defendant is arrested, they proceed to the pre-trial. So we're only on the third stage. The confirmation of charges happening any moment now, it's actually part of the third stage. It would, if they find sufficient evidence to warrant a trial, then they will proceed to trial. Trial will take long because we have a large volume of evidence across multiple incidents and locations. We have, if I'm not mistaken, there were allegations of at the very least 70 plus deaths. Now, it's not, some might ask, would be 70 more or less deaths be sufficient to arrive at the conclusion that there is a crime against humanity, 70 plus deaths? Now, you will recall, I explained earlier, one of the evidence to be considered, apart from document, object, and testimonial, is the evidence of a certain pattern. So the 70 deaths would be, I think that would be the purpose to prove the certain pattern. But what is being investigated earlier is not only 70 deaths. It involves, allegedly, official police records disclose there were 6,000 deaths, allegedly. But there's also a claim that unconfirmed reports would also show that there are more than 30,000 deaths. So you have to understand there would be complex motions, there would be a lot of testimonial evidence, reports, affidavits submitted. There would still be the continuing issue on jurisdiction, admissibility. There would also be questions on the translation, disclosure obligations, witness protection, security measures, issues. It's really going to take years. That's the reason why, since it's going to take years, that's the reason why the ICC would be assessing before we proceed to trial. We need to make sure that there is substantial evidence, there is sufficient evidence to warrant a trial. Otherwise, we dismiss it now. So that's what dismissing it or deciding whether it should proceed to trial, we will not be able to get it right away. The confirmation of charges will have to be done in, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 4 hearings. February 23 and 24 and 26 and 27. But after the confirmation of charges, the hearings, the pre-trial chamber is given not more than 60 days to decide. So it's not gonna be in February. We'll probably know about it March or April or even May. So it's gonna take years if it proceeds to trial. But if it doesn't, as early as April or May, this case would be dismissed or be terminated if the ICC is not convinced that the evidence is sufficient to warrant a trial.
That now makes sense in terms of why the process, at least the pretrial process, takes so long under the ICC, because they, with the very specific scope of what they cover under that particular court, they have to be really sure about everything that's presented to them. That, as you said, it cannot be hearsay, it cannot be just something published or shared publicly through media or social media. There must be many ways well, not many ways, but there are set processes in place by the ICC to verify and to authenticate everything that's being presented to them as actual cases or items to be filed in a case against a specific person under the specific types of crimes that they can investigate.
Well, actually, the intent there is to be very sure that the evidence is sufficient, because this is the third stage. All these 3 stages, the purpose of these 3 stages is to scrutinize, to check if the evidence is sufficient. It starts with preliminary examination, and then it's followed by investigation, still determining if it's sufficient to issue a warrant. And the third is pre-trial or confirmation of charges to determine if the evidence is sufficient for purposes of trial. So there's really various stages or levels to scrutinize the evidence.
Thank you, Attorney Chris Gargantiel, for your very informative insights into the legal process of the International Criminal Court. The developments at The Hague will be closely watched not only here in the Philippines, but also around the world. Again, I'm Michael Ang. Good day.